Hello weirdos, welcome back to my channel. My name is EmmaAbe and today we are going to be doing my October wrap up. So just so you know the context of just what is happening in my life right now, I'm filming this on November 3rd. So I haven't looked at any of the results. I mean, I've briefly glanced, but that's all I'm going to say about that. So there's lots of anxiety just happening everywhere. I actually read 13 books this month, so let's get into it. As always, I do it in order of when I read first in the month all the way to the stuff I read at the very end. My brain is going crazy. And the first thing I read is The Underground Girls of Kabul in Search of the Hidden Resistance in Afghanistan by Jenny Norenberg. And this I thought was going to talk a lot about just like girls in Kabul, and it does do that, but it specifically focuses on bacha posh, which is a very specific thing in Afghanistan where a woman or a young girl will dress as a man or a young boy in order to get certain privileges, but also for like her family's like status. It's a very interesting practice, and we like this. The author goes and she talks to all of these different people who have either been a bacha posh, who are currently a bacha posh. It's very, very interesting. I found it very informative. There's lots of talks in this about like what this means in terms of being queer or trans, because we like in a Western audience would be just like, oh, these girls are trans, where that isn't necessarily the case. It's a very specific cultural practice, and it shows that, hey, what do you know? Culture is complicated and not all culture is the same everywhere. And yeah, so I really enjoyed this a lot. I don't really know what else to say about it. It's very well researched. It's very interesting. I really liked hearing about the narrator's personal stories. I really enjoyed that about this. Yeah, I don't really have much else to say about it. If you're interested in like LGBTQ things and how that manifests itself in different cultures in weird and unexpected ways, pick this up. If you're looking at women's studies, this is very interesting. If you just like to learn about different cultures in general, I would recommend this. Okay, next. Oh God. I read Anna Karenina. This boy took me forever. This is by Leo Tolstoy. This is a chunker. Almost 1,000 pages. I started this like halfway through September and I finished it halfway through October, right? We're gonna go with that. More specific information is on my Goodreads if you're curious. I thought that this would revolve a lot more around Anna Karenina since she is the title character, and it's not that it doesn't, it just takes like a really long time for her to get introduced, and then it like shifts its focus like towards the end. Yeah, it was big. It was long. I don't want to say I hated it because I didn't, but I don't necessarily want to say that I enjoyed it. There are definitely certain parts that I enjoyed better than others. Sometimes the characters kind of like pissed me off because of just like the misunderstandings that were happening and just like the lack of communication. Also, there's just lots of like suicidal things in this, which was interesting. I tabbed one of them because it reminded me of Great Comet, which is one of my favorite musicals ever. And that is a specific line where it says, "It's the truth, I'm telling you. I do value my idea and my work awfully." This is Levin who's speaking, by the way. "But in reality, only consider this. All this world of ours is nothing but a speck of mildew, which has grown onto a tiny planet. And for us to suppose we can have something great, ideas, work, it's all dust and ashes," which I thought was really cool. And I remember just like sitting there thinking, I'm just like, Leo Tolstoy, are you okay? Like, so many of your characters just want to fucking commit suicide. Like, are you okay? And it's just very interesting, like the reasoning like behind suicide, because it's very just different than how we expect it. So I didn't hate it. I also didn't enjoy it. It's very long. I think that was the biggest thing for me. It was so fucking long. I hopefully will get to War and Peace eventually. We don't know about that. So continuing after, well, I guess during, anyway, I reread Gideon the Ninth by Timothy Muir, because I bought this and I wanted to reread it and I really liked it. I mean, lesbian necromancers, what more do you need? Literally nothing. I'm on board. I'm very excited to see what happens. I have Harrow the Ninth checked out. Yeah, it's gruesome, it's intense, but it's also just wonderful. And I really loved just all the twisty, turny things that were happening. Very enjoyable to me. I really like this kind of fantasy, and I love that Gideon herself is just gives no fucks. She's just like, I'm going to state my opinion and you guys can suck on my balls. I love that about her, and I think that is awesome. It's great. It's great. It's great. Anyway, moving on. Sorry, I can't. I just can't today. I can't today, but I need to film this, so this is what we're doing. Next book I read is White Fragility: Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo. So this book I thought was really interesting. It was a lot shorter than I expected it, and I read this for a book club that was going on at my university, and I do think it's a really good book to have as a book club because I think it can spark lots of really interesting conversations. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really get much out of it until the last 2 chapters, which is focusing on like how we can curb our white fragility, essentially. I do think that it is a good book to read. I just personally didn't get a lot out of it. I think it is very important to see like these perspectives and to see like why like you might, something that you say could be seen as problematic, but that's all stuff that like I already knew. And obviously like I can always improve because we can always improve to make our just everything better. But just for me, I just felt like I just didn't get like a lot out until, again, the last 2 chapters. So it was just like a lot of reading of just like, okay, I get it. Okay, I get it. Are you adding anything to the conversation? I would say yes, but I'd also say no. It really depends on where you are personally on like your level of anti-racism, essentially. So yeah, I would agree with her that it's just not a really good book for people of color to read because you're not going to get much out of it, but really, really good for white people to read. Next one. This is another thick boy. I read a lot of thick boys. This is Grant by Ron Chernow, and I did like this. It is, again, very long. It is longer than Anna Karenina, but I think this one I enjoyed a little bit more. I think maybe it was just the functions of the chapters. These chapters were longer, so I got to sit with the story longer. With this, I think it's very comprehensive. One thing that I will say I could have done with a lot less of the tacticalness of Grant. So it just gives a lot of details about what he did in certain battles and just put lots of details into the battles, and did the same thing like with his presidency. So like I would say about 2/3 of this book is mainly focused on like the Civil War and his presidency, which were very 2 very important parts of his life. But I felt like those could have been edited down and had a little bit less detail. Yeah, I also think this suffers from a little bit of like rose-tinted glasses, because just in the way that it talks about like what Grant did for minorities, which is, I was kind of like going back and forth because it's like, yes, he probably would have been considered like more liberal at his time, but for us it just seems like weird. Just not as liberal. And that was something that I was like struggling with, especially when it came to his Native American policies. One thing he did, he really, really fought for African Americans and their right to vote, their rights, fought real hard against the KKK, which is like, I think that is just a reason to stand. He did like purposely put like minorities and people of color into positions of governmental power, which I do think is an important thing. So he did that a lot with like African Americans and Native Americans. My thing that I really struggled with was his own personal views towards like Native Americans and how they should be dealt with. Essentially, he thought their culture was dying and they needed to assimilate fast. And he was just like, all right, let's Christianize and Westernize. I just found that to be majorly problematic. I didn't feel like there was enough analysis of that in this book. And that's kind of like what I had problems with. But other than that, it was very, very good. I've termed Grant like a sad boy. You do not know what a sad boy is. Probably don't, because I like probably figure it out. It's not that hard. But for me, I've been also watching a ton of Chinese dramas lately because I'm sad. And one thing I've noticed is that sad boys are what happens when a boy is parted with their partner and they cry about it and they're just so fucking depressed. And it is such good shit. I fucking eat that shit up. I love it. Every time there's a sad boy, like, I love it. Anyway, so, like, during, like, the first, like, couple of years with his relationship with his wife, he was abroad because he was fighting in wars and working as a person in the military, and he's just so fucking depressed. And I was just like, Jesus fuck, Grant has sad boy energy! And that made me happy. Anyway, that's that. Next book is I started the Trials of Apollo series, and I made a very impulse purchase, and I got the box set. This is the box it came in because on Amazon they're having a sale, and yeah, I have impulse issues when it comes to buying books, but yes, oh my god, I felt like this book just like was a like straight like just jolt to my system when it comes to reading the Rick Riordan books. I felt like with the last series, the last two books just weren't as exciting to me. Maybe it's just because I wasn't in like the right headspace to read them, but these are just such a breath of fresh air. I really like the character of Apollo. He is just a lovable asshole enough. He's like not really horrible, but he's like an entitled asshole that is lovable. And I just really love his character for that. Nico, precious Nico, he does come back. He got over his straight boy, which is just wonderful. This is the level of Nico that we want to see. Also, one thing I got really excited in, like the first half, I figured out that Apollo is canonically bisexual, and I got very excited because I was just like, I swear to God, if they do not acknowledge the fact that Greek gods not be straight, I will be very upset. And they did, and I was just so happy and like relieved to see that. I think that what's her face, Meg, the little girl, 12-year-old, I thought she was fun. Yeah, I think that sometimes the reveals of who the emperors aren't super surprising if you know Roman history. But if you don't, it's cool and it's interesting to learn about all these different people. That's this one. So immediately after reading that, I read the Dark Prophecy. Yeah, I burned through a lot of these books. I haven't finished the series yet, but because now my focus has shifted onto nonfiction November and Indigenous law reading, like solely. This again, really good. Really loved the dynamic between Apollo and the Emperor. That was cool and intense, and yeah, I'm very excited to like keep reading more of this. So yeah, same thing that applies with the last one that applies to this. All I will say is there's a lesbian couple in this, and they are wonderful. Ooh. Next book I read, and I finally finished, is Anthropology Explored, and this I read with my eyeballs. The rest I've read with audiobooks and following along. Yeah, this took me a really long time to get through just because of how I was reading it. I was breaking it up by like these sections because I just don't have patience to like sit down and read something for extended periods of time if I cannot get up and walk around, which is kind of hard to do given the layout of my apartment. But this is Anthropology Explored, Revised and Expanded, and it's edited by Ruth Ortosilig, Marilyn R. London, and P.N. Kaup, and this is essentially just a collection of essays about anthropology. Some of it specifically talks about anthropological work people are doing. So especially like archaeological, there's lots of archaeology in this. I could have dealt with less archaeology, but okay, that's just me. There is some like applied anthropology stuff thrown in here too, which I really liked. I think it does a really good job of just breaking down like what anthropology is and explaining things in a very like understandable way. There's a part in here, I didn't tab it, but I'm going to read a part of it that talks about like race and our conception of race that I really loved. So it's like talking about different ways we need to start looking at race, which if you're an anthropologist or have taken anthropology classes, this isn't novel, but for some people it really is. It lists 3 different ways, and the third one is what I'm going to read to you. The third conclusion is probably the hardest to understand, that races don't really exist, at least not outside our imaginations. And I was just like, yes, bitch. I was like, that is the fucking truth, because it goes into more detail into it. Essentially, there is more genetic diversity within a supposed race than there is between races, and in order to be classified as a specific race, scientifically there needs to be more genetic differentiation between two different races than within a race, and that's just not what we see. So boom, we are all one race, we just look slightly different. Plus there are no like specific features that only appear in one race. So for instance, like blonde hair, you can find that in people who are not white. You can find the same thing for curly hair and skin tone and all these sorts of things. And you're probably gonna get yelled at in the comments about this, but I do not care, because I know I'm right and you're wrong. And it's not a matter of opinion, because it's fact. There are some essays that I really, really enjoyed, some that I didn't, and yeah. Overall, I think this was really, really good. I don't know where you would purchase this, but I do think if you are interested in anthropology, maybe looking up some of the authors that are in this, because some of them do a really good introduction to their specific field and anthropology in general. Moving on, because I want to watch Chinese dramas. Next thing I read is another Trials of Apollo book. Yeah, I burned through these real fast. I'm not done with them, but there was lots of reading of them. And this is The Burning Maze. I, again, really, really enjoyed it. I love the stuff that was revealed about Meg. That was really interesting. Again, I think Grover returned at the very end of the last book, and we see more of Grover, and I was so excited to see Grover again, because I really liked his character, and I really felt his absence in like the last series, and some of the books, and it's just great to have him back. Yeah, these books are just really, really fun and enjoyable. I can't wait to read more. This is also the last one that I read out of these books, at least for now. I'm hoping to finish picking them up after November is done, or if I have more time, because I'm swamped. All right, next. Right, not that one yet. Next, I read Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. This is the one book that I read that I do not own. I really loved parts of it, and I really didn't like other parts of it. So essentially you follow this dyslexic boy, and they do not make that canon until like towards the end, which I thought was really weird, but they make it really, really obvious that he is dyslexic. He's a little baby boy. He's like 5 to 7, and I was just like, I will protect this child with my life. Do not hurt this baby boy or I will fucking murder you. Anyway, so it follows him and like his mom, and they're like fleeing an abusive relationship, and they move to this new town, and there's this weird creepy woods in the town, and all of a sudden this baby boy, he starts talking to this plastic bag, and no one really knows what's going on. That's all I'm going to say about the synopsis. I think the less you know, the better. And then just don't listen to the next bit where I'm going to talk, not necessarily spoilery, but maybe a little bit. We'll see. I really loved like just the slow pace of this. I think that the pacing was really, really good, and I think the writing was really, really good. I really enjoyed those aspects, and there were lots of aspects that kept bringing me forth. Like I really liked Christopher, who's I think is the main dude. I really liked his relationship with his mom. I think his mom is a badass. She's doing awesome things. And I really liked the relationship, like, with this plastic bag. There's also, like, this character that I just was not necessarily irritated at her with, just kind of irritated at, like, her plot. So she's very, like, raised, like, very, very Catholic and very, very religious fundamentalist. So it's kind of thing where it's, like, absolutely no sex. Like, if you think it, then you've done it. Like, very, very guilt, like just full of guilt shit, and like very slut-shamey, which is just very toxic. And it's not painted as something that's good. It's just something that I just don't like reading about. I remember just sitting there and like hearing her chapters and listening to her inner monologue where she's panicking about the fact that she is not asexual and that she's a thirsty bitch, which is completely fine. And I just wanted to like shake her and be like, it's okay to want to fuck your boyfriend. It's fine. You're not going to go to hell. The thing with Christopher, and it happens like relatively early on, is they supposedly like cure his dyslexia. I thought it would get better, and it just didn't. They just kind of cured it as like a plot point, and like everything was like supposedly like going better, which is like, okay. Like I felt like the whole like curing of his dyslexia thing was an unnecessary bit. You could have still done like what you wanted to do with his character arc. One of the things that happens very early on is that his mom gets the lottery, and like maybe you do a thing where like she can afford to hire, like send him to like private school or get him a private tutor, and that's how he improves. But it's not just because of like magically, because it happens like very instantaneously. Like he gets a test and he's able to get an ace this test. Like you could have shown him working really, really hard to get an A on this test and wouldn't have changed things. And they don't really like address it at all. I just took issue with that because that felt like erasing dyslexic people and just like saying like you don't need to exist and this is a bad thing, your life will be so much better if you don't have this, which I think is just an unintended message of the book. But it's just something that frustrated me personally as a person with dyslexia. And like I remember that time in my life. It was hard, don't get me wrong. That was not a happy time in my life, but I was able to get through it because of lots of hard work and combination of privilege and my parents being able to afford tutors. Yeah, and then the other thing, towards the end of the book, it just got to a scale that I didn't want it to be at. I think I really like horror books that are very small scale, where you're just threatening like a town or a community, because if you get too big scale, in my opinion, then it's just like, well, I don't like, it just doesn't seem very realistic. And I think for me, like a huge thing, part of my horror is that I really like things that are realistic. And if you have supernatural elements like you have in this book, I like them really grounded in like realism. And it just gets to like a point where it's just very much like to a religious level that I'm just not comfortable with, like a scale level in terms of like destroying the world or like not, that I just felt was unnecessary. It's like weird because it's like I didn't hate this book, but there was also like lots of parts in the book that I just did not like. And I felt like if those parts weren't there, or though they were changed, I would have liked this. I would have been able to say that I really loved this book. I really liked this book, but I just can't say that now with those parts in it. And I find that kind of sad. The next book I read is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. And I'm not super into like celebrity memoirs, but I heard really good things about it and I wanted to read it because I think Trevor Noah is really funny and I love his takes on race, like in America, and his stories that he tells about his childhood. And that is this in a nutshell. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I cried at one point. He narrates it himself, and I think they did a really good job because they have like snippets of different African languages in it, and Trevor actually knows how to speak those. So it's really, really cool. I just thought it was really, really funny. The way he delivers it, it's really, really funny, but it's also like gut punch as well in parts. I loved this. This is like probably like one of my favorite things that I read this month and this past month. Yeah, definitely worth it. Unfortunately, the audiobook is only available through Audible, and that's how I was able to read the audiobook. It makes me so sad because the audiobook is really, really worth reading. I hate that Audible has Audible exclusive things. But whatever. So yes, this one, if you're going to read one book that I read this entire like month, read this one. Next book I read, it's a reread from me, and that is Ever by Gail Carson Levine. And this is like my favorite book that I read of hers. And I don't necessarily like disagree with that. I just don't remember everything happening so fast. Things happened really, really fast in this book. Like it all happens basically over a period of a month. And I just kind of wish like things happened longer, like it took longer for things to happen, like for their relationship to develop, because that's essentially what this is about, is that this boy falls in love with her and she falls in love with him, and he's a god and she's not. She's also going to be sacrificed, so like what do they do? Again, I wish it was longer. That's like my big thing. I just wish there was more because I really enjoyed it. Some people did not like the writing style, but I did. I really like just the tributes to the fact that multiple gods exist in this universe. In terms, so like where he's from, his name's Olus. He's a god in a pantheon, but Kezi, she worships one god. And I really like that in this book it's canonical that each area has like their own like belief system and their own gods that are completely valid. They all know that, oh, we're the gods of this territory, but that territory over there, they have different gods. I think that's really, really cool, and I think that is really reflective of like this style of like ancient Sumerian, more like biblical era like text, because that's how stuff was treated. You know, each area had like their own sets of gods that were completely valid. It's not that they didn't exist, they're just not the gods of like our town, which I found was really cool. And there's just like a lack of like nuance in that in the world. Also, one thing that I appreciated, that this revolves a lot around how fucking thirsty that Kezi is. Oh, I did not pick up on it, but essentially she's just like, hot boy, I'm gonna be sacrificed in T-minus a couple of days. Let's go. And I just was just like, hell yes. I was like, I feel you, Kezi. Go for it. Get your mans. Have fun. And that's how I feel about that. I think there's like just lots of mixed reviews. And I'm just like, if you just go into it lighthearted and just go with it, I think you'll have a fun time. So the very last book I read is Lab Girl by Hope Jaron. And this is really interesting. Again, memoir is not like my favorite, not my personal choice for like my favorite nonfiction. But what I really liked about this is that it intertwined not only her life, but also like the science that she studies, which I found to be very, very interesting. And I really enjoyed when she talked about it. I also like just enjoyed the stories she would tell about her students, about this like lab partner. I really liked those stories. I read this with audiobook and following along, and just, I don't know, there's just something really interesting about how the narrator just read it. It was almost like off-putting, but not necessarily scary. Just, I don't know. It was really interesting. Let me know if you guys have read the audiobook with this. I think the narrator should narrate like horror stuff, because I think that'd be great. But it really came out like in the first couple of chapters when she was talking about living in like Minnesota, and up in the north. I think it just fit a lot with the tone of just like that writing and that atmosphere very well. But I enjoyed this. It was just very enjoyable. I really love that she pointed out that there's just not enough funding for science and for research in general. The United States just does not give enough funding, and that's a real shame, because there's lots of really cool, interesting research out there that can't happen because there is no money. And I'm just over here like, well, maybe we funnel some of our like defense fund into some research fund, and I don't know, that's just me, that's just my hot take, but whatever. All right, so that's this one. I really enjoyed it. Okay, so I am done. I need to go to bed, but am I going to sleep? No. Can anyone sleep tonight? I don't know. We'll see what happens. I don't think we're gonna know by the time this video goes up what's gonna happen. So good night. I'm gonna go back to my existential screaming. Now, goodbye.